Good morning, our listeners, for our Saturday morning breakfast show. Thank you very much for joining me already. It is a jam-packed show for today. So it is going to be really focused on teachers as researchers. And the focus will be with our special guest, Caroline Daly, who will be tuning in very shortly. And later on in the show, after our break, I'll be guiding you through how to conduct your own research project. Now, if you're thinking, Meera, it's the end of the term, I don't really want to be thinking about designing and conducting my own research project. I'm thinking about my summer holidays. That's absolutely fine. It is all about trying to get a bit more reflective and thinking about September, if you have got any thoughts for September, and putting anything in place and getting those conversations going before we start that new term, despite any kind of lockdowns or preemptive strikes that we have of closures. So really considering what we can do with our teaching practice and how we can move it forward. I would absolutely love to know if you've ever enrolled into a master's course, if you've enrolled in, have you achieved it? Have you done any sort of level of CPD that's involved research? I would absolutely love to know. So please do tune in, call in, let us know. It would be fantastic. And I know it'd be fantastic for us to understand how you found that process. Did you find it manageable? Is it easy to conduct research where you are as a teacher, and especially one of which is practitioner-led? How did you find that conversation with the students? So I would love to know your thoughts and ideas on conducting research within your specific context. We do have the wonderful Caroline Daly for today. She is from the Centre for Teachers and Teaching Research at the Institute of Education, UCL. I'm incredibly excited because she will guide us through all the fantastic projects that they're working on currently, but as well as their stance on teachers conducting research. She's going to share a really realistic and a very eye-opening view, I think. So I think you'll have a fantastic run today. Just to give you a little bit more background on Caroline, what I think is really important for you to know that Caroline is the director of the CTTR. And if you are looking to follow, then please do so at IOE CTTR. And if you're thinking, actually, I want to get in on this conversation, then please do link me in on Twitter, okay, through the conversation at TT Radio. So let me say that one again, okay? Let me just reread that one again. And get you informed as to how the best ways are to get us involved in that conversation online. If you want to link anything when it comes to Teachers Talk Radio, then please link us in at TT Radio 2021, and that would be absolutely wonderful. And I'll be able to have any comments that you make on the post that we have currently out on there. I'll read them out and I can share them with Caroline too. So Caroline's background, just to give you a little bit of an info for who she is and where and what has led her to this position, is that Caroline has and was a English and drama teacher in a secondary school for over 10 years, and that included her time as being head of English. So if you're thinking that she doesn't have that teacher perspective, she absolutely does, and is completely empathetic of our day-to-day routines, which I think sometimes can be difficult when we're working with institutions or universities that sometimes maybe not so aware of our routine and the rhythm of our day. But before teaching as a secondary school teacher, teaching as a secondary school teacher, she worked with the IOE in a English teacher preparation programme. She's also worked extensively in teacher education and professional learning for early careers teacher in England and Wales, and led a master's in teaching and learning for the London region, working with Cardiff University to direct a national initiative to provide professional learning as an entitlement for teachers. Now, she was also seconded to the University of South Wales in 2019 to 20 to lead an initiative to increase the role of research in initial teacher education. So Caroline comes with a wealth of experience and ideas when it comes to this area. And I think you'll find it really insightful if you have any questions in any of these given areas when it comes to teacher training for in the wider spectrum and not just within English and drama. I feel like Caroline's the person to definitely take on some of those questions. Now, moving forward into her career, she's also been the co-editor of the Learning to Teach English in the Secondary School in 2021, and also the fantastic book which I have bought and love, Debates in English Teaching, and is also the Fellow of International Professional Development Association. So being so well connected, Caroline has been able to provide us with a wealth of knowledge and just experience, I think, to this conversation today when it comes to looking at teachers as researchers, practitioner-led research, maybe even including young people as researchers too. It's really about trying to think, how can we make research manageable in our day-to-day lives? Because I think at times it can be quite unmanageable, especially when we are in the routine of things. And I think that's why I'm having this conversation now before we get into that first term back in September, because it can get really difficult. So please do share your thoughts. I would absolutely love to hear what you have to say. If you have conducted research recently, do you have a school-wide initiative? Sometimes we have initiatives such as gender gap, looking at literacy across the board, looking at numeracy, increasing reading for pleasure, etc. So there can sometimes be school-wide initiatives, which I'm always very intrigued with. Do they school-wide initiatives, do they fade away? Are they maintained? Do they keep on? Are they repeated through our kind of CPD sessions, should I say, or professional development sessions? So please do link me in and tell me how you feel when it comes to thinking about your professional development in light of research. Now, I've already mentioned that actually we have Caroline for the first part of today's session, for today's show, and later on I'll be guiding you through kind of all the key areas into thinking about your own research project. So even if you are thinking this is too much for me right now, you can save this podcast, keep it in your playlist, and have it as something that you want to go back to. I'll be going from everything from identifying your research topic, from having those clear aims and objectives and making them context specific, thinking about your methods to your methodology and what's the best one for you, and giving you all the options, getting ethical and really trying to think about the best ways of being ethical when it comes to looking at your particular context and the team that you have around you, and knowing that actually research is incredibly collaborative and it's all about getting other people involved in that moment of research, and that comes from students all the way to parents and guardians. Also considering our data collection approaches, all from qualitative data to quantitative data, and considering kind of what is realistic when it comes to designing a piece of social research. And finally, looking at our results and findings and really trying to observe that data to the final leg, which is my favourite part, is reflective and reflexive practice, where we have some time to really consider what we have achieved here and how we can move that forward, especially in light of our incredibly hectic year during lockdown. I think there's lots to be reflecting on, and thinking about our wider implications to our teaching practice. So there is lots to be taken away here. It will be an information heavy show, which I think could be fantastic. So that means you can keep it saved into your podcast and always go back for a listen to get to grips with all the key bits of information. Feel free to share this podcast with anyone that you think within your departments that would love to have a little nosy in on how to design their own piece of research. I think it'll be an absolutely phenomenal show to share with them. You do know that we are a jam-packed show, so you're going to be joined with a lot more of us throughout the day. So please do keep yourselves tuned in. Know that you're going to be having some company throughout today. So don't feel like you're on your own. You will have, I will tell you who you've got. So you've got me until 10:30. Then you've got the wonderful Amy Ferguson from 11 till 12:30. And then for your Saturday lunch show, you've got Tom Hopkins back joining you from 1 till 2:30. And then that will be it for today. However, it's a jam-packed show, so please don't leave us at all. I can see that Caroline's in the studio already, so we'll just wait for her to call in, and we'll get rocking and rolling with I say interview, but it's more like a chat. I prefer to say chat. I think that's a much better way of framing that, to be honest with you. Excellent. Caroline's in the studio. Welcome, Caroline. Can you hear me okay? Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. You've had a wonderful intro, and I'm very excited to have you here. Hopefully you've got a cup of tea in front of you. Absolutely. So thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a lot to get through, I should say. I'm having a little look at this, reflecting on this list this morning. There's a lot for us to be chatting about. So should we just dive in there? Fabulous. So currently at the CTTR, what research goes on at sorry, let me rephrase that question. What research goes on at the CTTR that is important for teachers to know about? So tell our listeners. Yeah, that's a massive. Oh, go on, sorry. Yeah, it's a massive change. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you've mentioned that because it's huge. Mm, mm. And I love that kind of idea of, I think what I love about your emphasis there, it's the practical elements, but also the idea that it's situated within your current context, within your current practice. And I think that's really lovely about what CTTR is doing here. So there's a really clear kind of project that is coming out of there, but also some key areas of research that you've mentioned there already, Caroline. Now, what is the purpose behind having a centre specifically for teachers and teaching research? I remember coming to the launch night and being very excited. Um, but tell our listeners what's the purpose behind the centre here. Mm. And I really admire the practical elements there because I think it's very difficult sometimes when we are trying to get teachers to conduct their own research projects. And I say that in a very that's a very clinical way for me to frame that. However, this feeling of doing research, it feels like it's in the world of ideas. And actually, it is very practical. And I think there has to be a marry of that. And I love the emphasis that you've placed on that. Now, when it comes to research, what does research have to offer teachers who are very busy professionals? Because I think that's a real cause for concern. We come to the end of the term, and I mentioned in my intro, I bet there's a lot of listeners thinking, Mira, I can't be dealing with a bit to think about research, and I'm just want to get to the end of the term. We want to just make sure we get there. So please give our listeners some positive words of wisdom, Caroline. It's not just me that feels that research is the most amazing thing ever. Hmm. Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important thing that you've mentioned there. And I think sometimes when you're in the profession for such a long time, we get into we're creatures of habit, aren't we, as human beings? And we kind of keep going. But actually, research has the ability to really allow us to refine and reshape our practice as we have different cohorts of students in different classes and different students in front of us. So thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes it's really, I found in my experience, research always falls into those who are early into teaching, but actually it can last for any moment or any time in your teaching career. Mm. Now we're going to come into the topic of the master's program, Caroline, and there could be some kind of there could be some feelings being given to us on this show about master's programs. One of which could be incredible happiness, and one of which could be like, I'm not too sure if this is the route for me. So now a lot of your kind of professional background is related to providing master's programs for early career teachers, and it can be a lot to expect for teachers in completing a master's program while in their first teaching post, or even afterwards, if they are willing to pursue, or kind of, couple of years into their teaching post. Um, any advice? What's your advice on that? Hmm. Yes. Mm. Mm. I love that because I did my master's course after, well, into my NQT year and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I also have another member of our team in our English department who was coming out of her NQT year to carry on in a master's course. And she goes, "Shall I do it? Shall I do it?" And I said, "I would say yes, but you've got to see if it's manageable for you." And it is incredibly rewarding. And if it provides you with a better, a clearer focus on your practice, and absolutely, I think it's a fantastic way of sharpening your practice as you develop into a stronger teacher, I think. Mm, I agree. Mm. I agree with you. Yeah, I really agree with you there. I think you've really hit the nail on the head. I think when you have a routine when you're coming out of your PGCE into your NQT year, if you've already embedded that within your practice and dedicate some time into research, that becomes easy to manage because you're used to it. That's part of your habit, so to speak, going forward in your career. But I think once you're into the school day-to-day routines and that kind of being swamped, I guess, in all the responsibilities that we have, I think it's really hard to then embed a new routine that it's a bit of you time, I suppose. It's like time for you to reflect and refine your practice when we're so used to giving our time, aren't we? Now, much of the centre's activity has highlighted the importance of mentoring to support new teachers. Now, mentoring seems to be getting a lot of attention in current changes, and I know it's been a hotly talked about topic in how we are looking at teacher training within our area. So, if you didn't know this, Caroline, already, I am an English teacher trainer in our local area. So I'm also interested in this a lot. So please feel free to really go into depth here. Now, what does the research at the CTTR say about mentoring for new teachers? Mm. Mm. That's really interesting there because I've often I've really seen a lovely mentor mentee relationship come into fruition in our department this year. And it's been absolutely wonderful to watch and observe because me being the trainer and the subject studies tutor, we have a very different role. So, yes, it's like we bridge into that mentor relationship, but actually it's such a different one because you're in the subject and being part of the subject knowledge remit, so to speak. And then going into the ECT phase, our trainee is now going into a new mentor for that phase, and that feeling of, oh, I have to connect with somebody else now, and that's somebody else out of the subject. And I think that's really lovely because there's a new perspective that trainee will now get into the profession. But I think it's a really interesting perspective of what the research has found, and I think it's nice to hear about this whole school approach. And a whole school culture that we have to kind of embed, embody, especially with the ECT changing for 2 years. Yeah, absolutely. And Caroline, as a little bit of an off the cuff one, do you have any top tips for people who may have trainees coming in this year, whether that be through the ECT route or somebody very early on in their teaching career as a trainee? How can people listening currently, or if they listen back to this, kind of take some words of wisdom away and think, actually, yeah, I can implement this, this, and this. What can they be doing to support, or what sort of words of wisdom can we give to mentors out there to support them? Mm, 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 Oh, okay. Tell us more. Mm, yeah. Yes. Yeah, really well said there, because I think it's so important that we acknowledge both the stresses and strains of the mentor as much as there is on the mentee, and that and the kind of the human aspects of that relationship. I think sometimes we get bogged down with the admin side and actually don't acknowledge the day-to-day routines and the implications of those routines onto that relationship. Only last well, when our timetables got released, well, I was going through and helping our trainees, saying, where's your mentor session that's been placed on there? And we were like, or maybe try and think about, well, how you could rearrange that, because it's on the end of the day, are you going to get the most out of that session? And kind of thinking about that throughout the academic year. So I think, like you said, it's a team effort, isn't it? Really, it's not just about one person, but it's about all of us helping and supporting that individual and the mentor as well, not just the mentee. No. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that dialogue is pivotal in how that individual go into the classroom the next day, or does and that's what we have to be really considerate of, I think. Now, in considering kind of any major issues, now what do you think are the major issues on the horizon for research into teacher education? And Caroline takes a deep breath. Mm, yeah. And I know that we've had that school-wide this year with students who are not happy with some of this text that we are reading within English. And so we've had to have an overhaul of listening to our students and thinking, actually, what texts are serving our students? What would they be interested in? And we're having to do a little bit of an audit. I say a little bit, it's not a little bit, it's a major audit of kind of how we look at our literature. And I think you're right. I think there's an element of thinking about that element of inclusivity, that we want to make sure that everyone feels that they are comfortable in the spaces that they're in when they come into lessons. Yeah. Now, Caroline, it wouldn't be a real show if we didn't talk about the pandemic, I think. Coming out of lockdown, it's all a bit much. And I think as much as we say we're coming out of a pandemic, I think a lot of schools would argue that actually some of this is still quite raw and quite fresh, and actually cases are still going up. So maybe we're not really out of the pandemic. We're still kind of in that phase of still being in a pandemic. Now, what does research say should be the main priorities for teachers as schools come out of the pandemic? Mm. And do you think that comes down to, and this is me being teacher hat on and kind of looking at, do you think that comes down to our need for normality? It's like we just go like, oh, we just want to get back to some normality. So do you know what we're going to do? We're just going to just carry on, but we're still, because we have gone through a moment of change, we don't want to have any more change. Do you think that has an influencing factor? Mm. I mean, it's hard, isn't it? When I say normality, I mean when we're thinking of, okay, we're gonna need to get through some content and we need to make sure that we're all back on track. And that feeling of that security of going through with our course content, but also trying to address those same routines as we did before the pandemic, when actually we know there's been so much change and there is still so much change. Yeah. Mm, 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 mm. Absolutely. And whilst you're on this topic, I think it's really important, and I don't know what light the research that you have in pandemic. I think it's something that has been talked a lot about on Twitter with practitioners, and I've seen it, and it's something that we've been really conscious school wide in how we phrase coming back to school and not using the recovery language or the deficit language or trying to say that they've lost out or anything like that. I think we've been very conscious of school wide. Um, What's your take on that, and what does the research say in light of that? 'Cause I think you've touched a little bit about that, and you've put a real emphasis on the curriculum, which is fantastic. But is there anything else you could say about that? Hmm. No. No. Absolutely. Absolutely, and I love the rephrasing of "to learn deeply." I think that's a really lovely phrase that I'll definitely take away from well, one of many that I'll take away from today's, show. On a final note there, Caroline, what can teachers be doing, and how can teachers get involved? If they're like, "Yes, I love the CTTR, I wanna know more," which I will be sharing links, by the way, listeners, later on. But what are some of the main ways that our listeners and future listeners on the podcast be doing, and how can they get involved really with the CTTR? Fantastic. Thank you. And if you're thinking, oh, don't know if I can do this, I think you can, because I've done it and I've been involved with the CTTR. So it's definitely doable and it's definitely manageable. So please don't be listening thinking, you can't take any more on your plate. That's absolutely fine if you want to take a breather. But also know that there's so many opportunities that can be manageable, and which means those little steps forward can mean that you can just improve your practice with a little bit more research. Thank you very much for today, Caroline. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning. No worries at all. And I will share all the relevant links in just a moment. If you do have any more questions or queries, please do link us in on Twitter at IOECTTR. And I'll be giving you the link shortly for the website too. So then you can go and see your links that Caroline has been talking about in just a moment. Thank you very much for your time today, Caroline. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Take care. Bye. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm loving the sound of what Caroline is talking about and I want to get involved. I mean, I talk from experience. I have been involved on projects before as a participant, but also as a supporter of projects too. It is a fantastic way of embedding a little bit of research within your practice. So here is the website, so you can take note of it. It's www.ucl.ac.uk/IOE-CTTR. I'll repeat that one more time there for you. www.ucl.ac.uk/IOE-CTTR. You can catch all the details there to be involved in any of the recent projects that the CTTR have got available for teachers. It's very much manageable, especially with our online meetings, which makes it so much more easy to be involved. But also, as Caroline mentioned, the events, which can be fantastic to be taking part. And if you're feeling like taking some resources, doing a bit of reading over that summer, go and have a look at some of those research summaries and get yourselves involved. Now, shortly after the break, I will be playing the news bulletin for you there. I'll also be looking for any callers in and texts in on anything that you're doing currently, about if you have been engaged in any research. What has been your experience? Is there any part of that conversation with Caroline resonated with you? I'd love to hear your thoughts and your ideas. Please feel free to call in, text in with your responses, and I'll read them out if you are texting them in to our listeners. So really thinking about that. And my initial question when I first started the show was really about your experience of the master's program. Have you enrolled into a master's program in developing your own subject knowledge, but also the pedagogical knowledge? And so what has your experience been when being on a master's course? Again, I would love to know, did you find it manageable? Was it something that you thought, actually, this is not for me right now? Or did you want to come back to it? And have you come back to it? I would love to know, so please let me know what your thoughts are. You are going to hear the news bulletin for today. So here it is.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. Researchers from the London School of Economics and the University of Exeter have released findings on the amount of learning students missed out on as a result of the pandemic. Pupils in Wales were, on average, the hardest hit, missing out on around 66 days of learning, with pupils in Scotland missing out on 64. Pupils in Northern Ireland and England missed out on 61 days over the year. There are normally 190 days in a school year. The data collected covered school term dates, attendance figures, and pupil learning rates, both at home and in the classroom. Ofsted has warned that schools may be using overtly political materials during lessons covering sex, sexual orientation, and gender reassignment, due to increasingly political sensitivities in these areas. The recent research by Ofsted looked into how gender issues were taught in schools and found that staff sometimes inadvertently included political material in their classes. Corporate Strategy Director Chris Jones identified an instance in which schools and parents did not see eye to eye on the content and age appropriateness of materials used to teach primary school children about same-sex relationships. The lack of a central curriculum intended to give space for schools to devise their own lessons on the topics has contributed to the discrepancies. Boris Johnson has criticised the former Education Recovery Chief, Sir Kevin Collins, implying his proposed recovery plan was not ambitious enough. The Prime Minister also stated his support for the longer school day, saying the evidence on lengthening the school day wasn't as powerful as it was on tuition, for instance. But that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. I do think it's the right thing to do. That was your latest Teachers Talk Radio News.
So there you have your news for this fantastic Saturday. If you're wondering who else is going to be joining you throughout today, then here you have the fantastic lineup. I did mention the timetable for this morning in the beginning segment, but if you have just joined us, here it is. For your Saturday brunch, you're going to be joined by Amy Ferguson from 11 till 12:30, and for Saturday lunch, you're going to be joined by Tom Hopkins-Burt from 1 till 2:30. So you'll have us all up until that afternoon. So stay tuned and stay linked in. But now I'm going to be talking to you through some of those key areas of defining your own piece of research. So if you're thinking that you like some of the ideas of what Caroline was mentioning before, I will talk you through the key areas of building your own research project. This is definitely a podcast to save to the side, and you can keep there. You can go back and look at some of those key areas to guide you through your own practice when it comes to developing your own research project. If you think to yourself, well, actually, Meera, this is not something for me, but I know there's a colleague that would love this, please feel free to share it across, and it'd mean the world to know that what you're doing. And I'd like to know if you have listened to this and then developed your own research project. Please do keep me informed. Now, we're going to kickstart with that first area, and that first topic is really identifying an area of research, identifying a research topic. Now, think about what's going to improve your practice. Exactly as Caroline mentioned, it's individual to you, but also your context that you're in. I always do a thing called SWOT yourself. So your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats when it comes to developing a really good research project. So I'm a big fan of that. So a good swotting is great for that, because you can identify key areas of the strengths within your practice. What are some of the weaknesses, and you think the areas that you really want to improve upon? But also, is there any opportunities within your school, within your context, to develop a research project that's going to have longevity? And any kind of threats. I mean, for a lot of practitioners who'd conducted research this year, the pandemic was a threat, but it became an opportunity. So again, look at the relationship between those four areas when identifying them for yourself. Is there a school-wide objective that you have? I know that sometimes we have things like the gender gap, literacy, numeracy, reading for pleasure, writing for pleasure, etc. There's lots of school-wide initiatives that take place. And does your own personal research project fit into that? So have a consideration for that. And if it doesn't, that's absolutely fine. Think about how that still could be of the benefit of the wider school community. I always look at kind of how the student is at the centre, and it moves out throughout all the way, looking at our wider, greater community. And that's something I've always gone back to. And sometimes we think of research as being this incredibly big thing, but actually it's just formalized curiosity, as Zora Neale Harrison had mentioned in 1942. It's just poking and prying into, kind of with purpose, in considering what your practice is, but also where you want your practice to go, in thinking about your own professional development, especially as we go into a new academic year in September. So hopefully that gives you some kind of food for thought to kind of get those initial sparks thinking, those initial little moments of curiosity going. Really considering that actually this is social research. It's all about, when you are conducting social research, it's all about the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviours and experiences of people that you're working with. And not only just students as a part of that process, but also that comes with your teaching assistants, your colleagues, those that are supporting you in the pastoral side of education, as well as your safeguarding, but all the other people that make up that community that can have a huge influence in how you develop that research project, how you gather data, so to speak, later on. So knowing that actually research is incredibly collaborative. And don't be afraid to get other people involved. I think sometimes when we have an idea, we keep it to ourselves and we want to kind of have that control, but actually talking to others and speaking about your research projects, you'll find that other people may have very similar ideas, and you can work with others, and that can kind of help with the workload and make things a lot easier and nicer, because through conversations and dialogue, you'll be able to develop your own practice within those. Now, the next phase of the research journey is really about identifying your aims and your objectives, really carefully considering your context, where you currently are, who are the learners in front of you, what are they learning, how are they learning, and considering that wider implications for what you're about to set as your aims and your objectives. Are you going to take an action research project, or are you going to go for more of a case study approach? And what do you really think is achievable? And when I say achievable, I'm not looking for a 10,000 word essay at all. I'm thinking about something that is actionable, something that's practical, but something that you can feel like you've moved forward with when it comes to moving forward in your own practice. So this doesn't mean of typing anything up, but if that's something that you like to do, kind of having some notes along the way, absolutely fine. There's been research posters that people do, audio recordings, presenting their ideas. There's loads of different ways of getting all your evidence, so to speak, together. Now, a key point that I've taken away from the Developing Children as Researchers book by Kim Sheehy and Kerawala is there's three kind of core steps, three core phases of being systematic, being skeptical, and being ethical when it comes to research. I'll really put an emphasis on being ethical later on. So you think about what your initial questions are about your own practice. How would you like to investigate them? What your research question looks like and how you would collect data. If you're thinking, I've got some ideas and I want to share them with you, Meera, then please do so. And if you are listening live, I'm more than happy to help and advise along the way and stop me at any moment. So don't ever hesitate. If you would like some advice, I'm more than happy to share some words of wisdom and any best in my capacity that I can. Okay? So really framing your research question is going to be important, but it's one that evolves over time. It's not something that you can have and then it's concrete. Actually, it evolves over time, especially as you're reading. And reading doesn't have to be just through journals. It could also be through Twitter feeds, blog posts. It could be a conversation that you have and somebody's recommended a little snippet of something. So reading text can be vast and a range of different methods and ways. So that's the initial part, the reading, setting your aims and objectives, identifying that topic. And then once you've got that, that's when you get to the meaty part. The meaty part is really the methods and the methodology, where we start to really think about the ways in which we're going to gather our data. Now, I personally used to always get quite confused with the differences between methods and methodology. And the best analogy that I learned through my own master's teaching course is that your methodology is the toolbox. It's the carrier of all your tools. It's the processes of gathering data in the most broadest sense to allow you to gather that data. But your methods here are the tools inside that toolbox that you need to use to gather data. So the two have to be in relationship with each other. And your data can be either primary or secondary sources, through those primary or secondary sources, as well as considering where you are and what's actually achievable in gathering data. For a lot of practitioners during lockdown, observations were not as easy, or sometimes for others it was because they were able to record lessons and they were able to go back on that with the right permissions in place. So carefully consider your methods as much as possible, the tools that you have, and the processes that are going to allow you to get to getting to the end goal of answering or providing a window into the thoughts, behaviors, feelings, experiences of people, because that's the core of what we're doing here. Now, I've got a couple of examples where this has worked really well, where those methods and methodologies have worked with each other really well. Through the Innovate Journal, we had a fantastic example of an SEN intervention strategy, which is very local to where I am. And they used a couple of methods. They used a data recording sheet along with student interviews and teacher observations. The real aim of that project was to look at an intervention strategy of students who are really struggling to remember how to spell their name. And in doing so, what they found was there was an intervention strategy they placed of repeating the process 3 times before moving on, regardless if the student had maybe remembered how to do so in the second step or the first step, but to repeat that process 3 times before moving on. And the insight there was that using 3 different ways to gather that data provide a really fruitful way of understanding the process of learning for that student. So the 2 students that they had were able to, after the summer holidays, still be able to recall their names. So it was fantastic that the intervention strategy worked. The way in which they collected data was fantastic. So it was really kind of thinking about how we could move their practice forward, and that was for a group of teachers in a primary setting. If you are calling in, I do apologise, I didn't click invite quick enough. I will get there. I was too busy talking. Now, my second example was flipping the classroom. I don't know if any of you have flipped a classroom before. Please do share your ideas on that one. Another teacher had tried the strategy of flipping the classroom and using the flipped learning approach, and used a range of gathering data. So she kind of used a model of this is an action research approach. Tried a new teaching strategy. She used the worksheets that she was using with students, as well as looking at students' written work. So she was looking at 2 bits of evidence there, really, when it came to her practice, but also engaging in conversations with students about how well they thought those activities were working. Now, really consider at this point, when you are looking at your research, is how you're designing your research. How are you going to gather data? And is it manageable within your day-to-day? How manageable is this? I think that's particularly important. And who do you need to be informing? And that's going to be a part of my next step there for being ethical. The stress level. Thank you very much for that comment there. Has the stress level of students been concerned? For those people that have been part of research, I think if we're being open and transparent with the process of research, it's not as stressful. I think when we start to gather data and it all becomes a little bit, and students aren't aware, then I think that it's a really odd and awkward part of practice. I'm a massive believer of making sure that we are really clear and open and transparent with students when it comes to research, of having them on board. And actually, I've taken part in research when students have been part of the research process and presented findings, have gathered data and been a part of it. So it's been a massive learning curve in that way. If I've got that question wrong, then please feel free to rephrase it and I will address it again better, so to speak. Now, moving into that next phase of that research is of ethics. I think ethics is a hard part for a lot of teachers, and it becomes a really difficult way for us to understand. And the best way that I can help to understand the areas of ethics is transparency. Get everybody who's involved, get them to know exactly what the process is, and keep it simple. Make sure parents and guardians are aware, make sure students are aware, get your safeguarding team involved, ask them any questions, see what they say, what advice is available from the safeguarding team. I know that's been really helpful for me. If I've ever done any work with special educational needs and development students, it's always been I've always got our SEN department involved. So having all those key players involved is incredibly important. And having a working document, if you do have online platforms and you have any working documents, that can be a much easier way for people to contribute, and it allows you to filter through and read all the relevant comments. So I know that in our school we use Google Classroom, and having a Google Doc set up, when you've got all those right people shared into that document, it means that everyone can see exactly what your plan is for your research journey, and also what comments they're saying, and then you can use it as a part of your reflective practice. And keep those comments as well. Don't ignore them or delete them afterwards. Keep them, because they're really valuable when it comes to your write-up or your reflections later on. If you're thinking, actually, I want a bit more than that, Meera, I want to get to know my ethics real good, then you've got the BERA ethical guidelines, but you've also got getting in touch with your local universities, wherever you are, getting in touch with your local universities and seeing what they do in their ethical boards is a great way and a great insight. For me, I've had a great insight through the Open University and the ethics team there, through the research projects that have kind of come to us, and me learning that process as much as possible. I think it's incredibly fascinating for me, because I think there's such a marry up between what we do through safeguarding for students, but also the ethics side of things. There's a lot to be said about that and that conversation there. So if you're worried about ethics, feel free to talk. Informed consent, getting your consent forms nicely written up, talk to your talk to the people within admin, making sure that that communication is sent home. I'm not too sure how we have very different ways of communicating with those at home, especially from primary to secondary settings. I think in primary you have a lot more face-to-face contact. In secondary it could be through parent comms. So again, just think about the avenues that you're using there to get in touch with your students, parents and guardians and carers. Now I'm going to move into the good bits, the nitty gritty bits. The bits that I love is when you've got everything in place, you're ready to go, and it's that time to collect that data. You've got the date in the diary for your lesson, and you're like, oh, this is it. I'm going to get all my data today, and it's going to be wonderful. And be ready that it may not be. Be ready for things to happen, because we are working in schools, we're living with people. So be ready for any kind of unexpected events, any fire alarms, any ways in which could hinder data collection. So I always do a little audit when it comes to data collection for before and after gathering data. So what do you think of before gathering your data, and what have you noticed afterwards? And go back to your literature. It's a really good point for your data collection to have a little pause and go back to your literature and know what, if it does marry up, do you need to go back to do a bit of reading to kind of sharpen that toolbox to make sure that your final outcomes really reflect what you've read, where you are, what's your current context. So that's a little checkpoint there when it comes to data collection. Now, I think it's very difficult when it comes to social research, when we're really looking at how we're recording thoughts, feelings, behaviours and experiences. Is what you've initially considered recording data the best way to present your data? I've been in lots of situations where we've done interviews, or we've done observations, or conducted certain conversations where we as a researcher can be biased in steering the conversation in a particular way because we have an agenda. Be really mindful as to how you frame questions, and have questions written down, and really look at those questions before you say them out loud, because I've been a culprit of this, of when you think, oh, actually, yeah, this is what my end goal is, and my now questions have now steered students into telling me what they think I want to hear, and that again can ruin everything, especially when students are very aware of the research objective and very aware of the goal of that piece of research. So be very mindful of how that dialogue happens. A good way around that is triangulation. Now, triangulation is the method used to increase the credibility and the validity of your research findings. It's using more than one method here. So using more than one method to gather your data will really allow you to strengthen your results and your findings and those final conclusions. That credibility really refers to that trustworthiness, making your data more believable. And it's the validity that is concerned with the extent to which the study is accurately reflecting and evaluating the concept or the ideas that you are investigating. Now, triangulation doesn't have to be just through the data collection methods. It could be combining theories with your methods to your observers in that research study. So really think about the bigger picture and how you're going to strengthen and validate and be credible when it comes to defining that piece of research. Because in order for it to have longevity, you need to make sure that what you're doing has that weight and that leverage. Now, when it comes to gathering data, we say data in the very broadest sense because I think data in schools, we have all our standard data when it comes to looking at student progress and pupil progress, etc. But when it looks at kind of data in thinking about social research, really consider the two of qualitative data and quantitative data. Now, qualitative data really looks to understand the world better around us. We want to have a better idea of those thoughts, feelings, behaviours. It focuses on the how and the why questions. So if you're thinking that's the way to go, really focus on the how and the why questions when designing your particular ways of developing your questionnaires, your interviews, your surveys, etc. Your quantitative data really looks to prove or disapprove a hypothesis. It's concerned with variable factors. I would say quantitative data are spreadsheets, are people tracking progress sheets, are kind of anything to do with numerical data is a really good way to have an overview of something. To have that data in front of you and say, okay, what's the overview? What is that data telling us? What do those numbers actually say to us? And that can be your starting point to dive deeper into something, to then use the qualitative data to provide a light on the thoughts, feelings, behaviours and experiences of young people. So don't be afraid of that. At this point, I would get you to start thinking about a focus group, because sometimes a focus group is easier to manage, not only for the people involved, but also for yourself. You may have a focus group of student researchers that's going to help you with this piece of research and allow you to move this piece of research forward. So, for example, you could say, okay, whilst I could be the research facilitator, the consultant, I've got a group of young people who are going to be core in gathering data, but also trying to consider different ways in which we gather that data and our methods that we're going to use. So do consider that. You can have focus groups in the sense of having a group of young people together and you have questions accordingly, and that can be a nice environment for students to engage with, and the data there can be a lot richer. I would definitely consider trying to get those conversations recorded. It's much better to have those conversations recorded, so make sure your consent forms have mentioned that, and it's saying as to where that data will be stored and held, and if it's and how it will be password protected. The final 2 steps, I guess it gets better and better for me because these are my favourite steps. You've done everything. You've got your research objectives in, your aims and objectives, are in. You have got all the right people involved. Your consent forms are done. They're there in front of you. You've gathered your data. It's clear what you've done, and everyone's been on board. And the end result, if you've got your results and your findings, the final conclusions of which you can draw upon to feel that you've achieved it, you've done it, and you've got something there that's evidencing your journey within this process, which is phenomenal, superb. Now take some time away and go back over that data. Just step back, observe. And this could be a week, 2 weeks, etc. Sometimes research can be intense. Take a little step back, observe what you've got there, and then go back over your data with fresh eyes. You may want to have a colleague there in front with you so they can have a look at that piece of data and maybe shine a different light on it. Maybe a departmental approach or a whole school view that can be used as to provide a perspective for you and provide you a very nuanced way of looking at the data in front of you. So do consider that when you've got your data. I think it's so easy to get into that data, think, okay, here are my ideas, that's the result, and it's done. But actually think a lot more broadly and the wider implications, which are going to come in the reflexive part of what I'm about to talk about much later on. That process of stepping back can really allow you to notice different aspects and make sure you can also link that back up to the literature, what you've read. Does it marry up? Does it not? Have you found out something new in your particular context? Now, which parts of the process became data rich? Where was it that the data became incredibly fruitful and that moment in your gut where you're like, this is it. This is where I found it. This is the thing that I was looking for and I've got it. And if you haven't got it, why was that the case? Let's evaluate it. And notice that if there are things that are not successful, acknowledge it and have that as a part of your process and mention that if you are doing the write-up. We often ignore the things that don't go well, but I'm a big advocate of things that we should have that as a part of the process of us learning and growing to be better practitioners. What are the influencing factors that may have influenced your data? I mean, the pandemic is definitely one thing that has influenced data collection for many of us. It could also be access, the digital divide. It could be the access to actual resources, but also access to different platforms, to access to knowledge, subject knowledge, etc. There's so much to consider when it comes to influencing factors. Be really broad about that. Really consider your context. And again, talk to others. If you're not aware of those wider implications, talk to others because they may think actually, oh, you haven't considered this, and I think this might have helped, this might have hindered. That student is also going through X, Y, and Z. This could have influenced them on that day when you were talking about this. So again, look at the bigger picture. When I say things like that, sometimes actually student diaries and journals can be helpful. Teacher diaries and practitioner diaries can be very helpful too. So again, consider those as a part of your data collection methods. Do your results reflect your initial research question? And if so, how do they answer your research question? Was it the way that you intended to, or was it completely different? Did you expect that answer, or is there something completely different that's come out of it? And if so, why has it been completely different? And what has influenced that journey to get to that result? How do you feel about your research? A really important question. We don't talk about feelings and research a lot. And how do you feel about the data that's been gathered? Sometimes I've gathered data and I've thought, oh, this is not what I intended. where sometimes I'm like, this is it. I can't believe it. We've got like, this is exactly what we were thinking. And it's married up with what students have now responded with. So there's been a great marry up with that, but it doesn't always happen. And really consider, what does your journey ahead look like? If you've got this data, don't just file it away and think it's done. Do something with it now. It has the leverage to really impact fantastic change within your communities, and think about what that could look like. Think about the forms in which it could take place and where it could go to in order to enhance the spaces of teaching and learning for others. Now, the final part of this process is the bit that I probably talk about in probably every show that I've done in some format, is reflective and reflexive practice. And I'm a big advocate of this because I think we do it very naturally as teachers, and we conduct research very naturally in our practice, but we don't formalize it. And that reflective practice is really thinking about what you've learned and what it means to you as a learner in this process. So really thinking about, what have you learned through this journey and what it means to you from what you have learned. And the reflexive side is the thing that I love to push people forward on when it comes to thinking about their own research. Now, where are you as a learner considering the implications from your data, from what you have learned? And what is the impact now in your wider context? If you think, okay, the impact is now in term 1, I've done this, and by term 2 and 3, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. That's phenomenal. You've had a change in your academic year and change in your approach. You may say, actually, by the end of this academic year, I also want to implement this. I want to talk to my head of departments, or I want to kind of have a conversation with those further afield to see what I can do to make change, or to tweak, or to provide evidence, or shine a light on. And that can be a part of that process. Really consider your next steps and who you need to get involved in having that conversation, because it will really guide how you take that data and all that hard work you've done, how you're going to take that forward. So that is really, in a nutshell, I say, the research journey. And if you do have any questions, queries, please do post them, text in, call in. I'm more than happy to have a conversation about it. It'd be fantastic for me to hear your thoughts on any master's program, any level of research that you've done yourself, anything that you feel that you want to start but you're not too sure. I'm more than happy to open up about that and guide. And maybe you're sat there thinking, oh yeah, I've got this, but I'm not too sure, and there's somebody else thinking that, so maybe that's a really good way to kind of open up that discussion. And again, remember, there's loads of different ways in which you can get involved in research projects. The CTTR is a fantastic centre, and one of which ways that you can do that. But also consider those universities around you, if there's ways in which you can get involved with what they're doing the nearest to you. I know that's an approach that I've taken, and it's fantastic because it means that your research is very localised, and it speaks to the people and the learners in your community. So hopefully you've enjoyed that second segment where I have divulged my steps into designing your own research project. It's very much it can be a tough process, but it can be the most fruitful and rewarding process that there is as well. So don't take it too lightly. I think you would love the research process if you haven't already done so. If you're considering taking a master's program or a research type course, then please do get in touch. I would love to get to know. I would love to see what you're getting up to. And if you need any advice or help, then feel free to follow me on Twitter at Meera Chudasama, and I'm more than happy to help and have done so in the past. So don't ever feel afraid of asking a question. That's where it all starts. Now, I have already mentioned before to you that you are going to be joined by Amy Ferguson and Tom Hopkins back later on today. Straight after me is Amy Ferguson from 11 till 12:30 with a Saturday brunch show. I'm sure she's very excited to know what you're having for Saturday brunch. And then following Amy there, you've got Tom Hopkins back on the Saturday lunch show from 1 till 2:30. He'll be providing you some company there too. Thank you very much, Imran, for the great advice, and I found it very resourceful. I'm really happy. Thank you. And if you are doing any level of research there, then please do keep me posted. It would be fantastic to know what you're getting up to when it comes to conducting that piece of research. And when it comes to whole school research, I think you may have there's a lot going on. Maybe there's an agenda already been set for September. There's a whole school approach, especially after post-lockdown. What does that look like for you in your schools? I'd be interested to know. Tell me what's going on. I know that we've set some ideas up for next year, and I'm very excited to be a part of that team to kind of see what that looks like moving forward. We're also in that phase where as much as the lockdown has impacted our practices, so that we all also have the things that we want to focus on, our own professional development areas, and what do they look like? So yeah, please do get in touch on those fronts to share some ideas there on what you have already going in the pipeline, so to speak. I am going to play the news bulletin there for you again if you had missed it before, because I know we've got some new listeners involved already. So I'm going to play the news bulletin there for you, and then I'll do a final wrap up there on all the key ideas and top tips that I've got ready and lined up for you there.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. Researchers from the London School of Economics and the University of Exeter have released findings on the amount of learning students missed out on as a result of the pandemic. Pupils in Wales were, on average, the hardest hit, missing out on around 66 days of learning, with pupils in Scotland missing out on 64. Pupils in Northern Ireland and England missed out on 61 days over the year. There are normally 190 days in a school year. The data collected covered school term dates, attendance figures, and pupil learning rates, both at home and in the classroom. Ofsted has warned that schools may be using overtly political materials during lessons covering sex, sexual orientation, and gender reassignment due to increasingly political sensitivities in these areas. The recent research by Ofsted looked into how gender issues were taught in schools and found that staff sometimes inadvertently included political material in their classes. Corporate Strategy Director Chris Jones identified an instance in which schools and parents did not see eye to eye on the content and age appropriateness of materials used to teach primary school children about same-sex relationships. The lack of a central curriculum intended to give space for schools to devise their own lessons on the topics has contributed to the discrepancies. Boris Johnson has criticised the former Education Recovery Chief, Sir Kevin Collins, implying his proposed recovery plan was not ambitious enough. The Prime Minister also stated his support for the longer school day, saying the evidence on lengthening the school day wasn't as powerful as it was on tuition, for instance. But that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. I do think it's the right thing to do. That was your latest Teachers Talk Radio News.
So there is your news bulletin for today. So my top tips then for you when it comes to conducting your own piece of research is, your first thing is, what are you really excited about? What is the thing that you're excited about for next year, for September, that you want to try out, test out within your teaching practice? That leads me to my second one. How is it going to be manageable for you? Know that next year is going to be a full academic year. Make that first term back something that you can manage, and not something that's going to make you feel stressed or concerned or have a negative implication on who you are as an individual. So really important, make it manageable. Context, my third one. What is applicable to your context for your learners in your departments, in the particular context and the community that you are living in? Make it applicable, practical, and achievable. Thirdly, who can you get involved? You're part of a community. Research is totally collaborative. So who can you get involved in that process? So get talking, have those initial conversations, say, oh, actually, no, I'm thinking about this, in September. What are your thoughts and ideas about that? Is that something similar within your department? Start that conversation. It'd be fantastic. Get connected. Use Twitter as that way of getting connected with others and sharing your ideas. It's fantastic. So please do so. Link me in, link us in. I'd love to know. And finally, get reading. Use that summertime. Do one little bit of reading that's going to help you get into that mind frame when it comes to September. Now, currently, a little bit on the side, on an off topic, if you are thinking, what are you reading, Meera? Telling us to get into some research. What are you reading? What are you thinking about so far? Well, currently I'm reading. I've got the book in front of me. I'm reading Susie Ramroop's book, "Be the Leader You Want to See." I'm really reflecting on kind of internally, kind of my next steps forward as to developing my practice on a professional, for my own professional development. So that this book has been a real lovely read, especially when it comes to, I love a bit of reading with students. So that's been my book so far that I've been using. So yeah, that's been my go-to at the moment, if you have been wondering what I've been reading. Hopefully you've enjoyed this show today. I have thoroughly enjoyed having Caroline on this morning. It has been wonderful. And if you're thinking, well, I still don't know how to get involved with the CTTR, well, do follow them on Twitter at IOECTTR. Very easy to do so there. And then you've also got Caroline, the centre's website, which has got all the relevant links, but all the ways in which you can be involved in the projects there for you. And that link is www.ucl.ac.uk/IOE-CTTR. And as Caroline mentioned, there is some fantastic events coming up, one of which on the 13th of October. If you want to sign yourself up to that one, you're more than welcome to, as well as the resources that are available, research summaries and events that are going on, so you can absolutely take part. So you can take part in research before you can go and conduct your own, if you think that's a more fitting approach for you there. So lots of ways for you to get involved there. And if you are looking to develop your own research and you are feeling a little bit more nervous about doing that, please do feel free to get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to help. You can find me on Twitter at Meera Chudasama, and stay connected with the Teachers Talk Radio community, and that's at TT Radio 2021 on Twitter. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas, and comment away, please. We'd love to see your comments and engaging in our content, please. So I hopefully that's been a fantastic show for you. Have it saved there, saved podcast there for a future reference as we are going into the final legs of our term. Hopefully you're not feeling too tired. You can keep those energy levels up, and you're taking some time up for yourself. You're looking after yourselves. It's been a wonderful morning so far, and I know you're going to be joined by Amy Ferguson and Tom Hopkins-Burke later on today. Stay connected. I look forward to hearing any comments and queries online, and I'd love to chase up any conversation that we've got there as well. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday, guys. Take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.